Hi, welcome everyone. My name is Jewel. I'm the YAF chapter president here at NMSU. It is no lie that the dream of bringing in an honest, determined, and proud conservative speaker here seemed impossible. Our advertisements were shut down, our words were silenced, and our opportunities were made so difficult to reach. Yet we stand here tonight, overjoyed and eager to fend and fight for the truth. I would like to personally thank my YAF chapter and volunteers, as well as Young America's Foundation and all those who helped in making this event possible. I would like to thank YAF supporter Louis Bayed, whose contribution especially made tonight a reality. I am honored to welcome him to the stage to kick off our event.
Good evening. Welcome. It is a great privilege that I've been given this task of introducing our guest of honor and speaker. Tonight is dedicated to those who believe in change, those who believe in life, and even those who are here to disagree. Before we get started, just a little housekeeping. If you're here for the RuPaul family-friendly drag show with cabaret people, that's on the second floor. And you're in the wrong room. Just a little reminder that we are here today to expand our minds and take away new knowledge. Disruptors will kindly and quietly be escorted from the ballroom. And there may be disruptors. This gentleman gets threats all the time, and I certainly pray that he and his family will always be safe. Our special guest tonight is one of the few courageous speakers willing to educate the nation against gender ideology. He's responsible, in many people's opinion, for a handful of states that have already passed laws protecting children. He is the renowned creator of the documentary What is a Woman? And the author of the best-selling children's, maybe the best-selling ever, of the children's and LGBTQ book, Johnny the Walrus. He's a host of his own podcast, The Matt Walsh Show, and a famous columnist for the Daily Wire. Without further ado, please join me in a round of applause to welcome our respected speaker tonight, Matt Walsh.
Great. I was actually going to start with the drag show, but he said I'm not doing one, so just going to cross that off the list. Before we get into our topic tonight, we should begin by acknowledging the enormously consequential and historic event that occurred today. The former President of the United States, Donald Trump, was officially charged and arraigned with dozens of entirely frivolous felony charges. And yeah, I mean, if you're not a fan of justice, then I can understand why you would applaud that. There's simply no question that this is a political hatchet job, motivated both by the DA's thirst for relevance and attention and by the Democrat Party's desire to punish its enemies. They used what they are calling novel legal theories, otherwise known as fabricated crimes, to enact vengeance on their adversaries. The interesting thing about this indictment, and I did read through it, is that they never actually said what the crime is. And I'm not a lawyer, but usually with indictments, I'm pretty sure they're supposed to lay out what the crime is. They're supposed to explain how you committed a crime, and they didn't do that with this indictment because he didn't commit a crime at all. There's no way out of this but through. Mutually assured destruction is the only response we have available to us. They look for ways to throw conservatives in prison, and now we have to do the same. We're heading to an ugly place, but shying away from it and remaining in denial isn't going to solve anything. So the other side, Republicans, have to realize what time it is, and we need conservative DAs to look for crimes committed by high-ranking Democrats and make an example of them. That's the only way to do this. That's not really related to the topic at hand. I just wanted to start with a little cheery tidbit before we get into things. Another major event happened just a week ago, which, partly thanks to the media circus around the Trump arrest, has already been shoved down the memory hole in a lot of ways. A trans terrorist in Nashville walked into a Christian school and massacred 6 people, including 3 young children.
What about the 300
Now, in the immediate after...
straight men who are killing people in schools?
Shut up.
Now, thank you. So you hear this is the reaction that you get. They don't even want us to acknowledge these victims. I'm talking about 9-year-old children who were killed, and we have this jackass over here screaming to try to drown us out. I don't know where you are, sir, but you're a coward and you're evil. Okay, that's what you are. Now, the FBI got involved in the case, and suddenly all of the admirable transparency that the authorities began with in the first few hours went away. Now, we know that the shooter has a manifesto where they described why they committed these crimes. There's no telling if it will ever be released to the public at this point. So we're left then, as always, to speculate. By far the most reasonable theory is that this was a targeted attack, a hate crime against Christians carried out by a mentally disturbed, gender-confused young woman who was fueled by the self-loathing despair that naturally springs from trans ideology and by the hysterical, paranoid, militant propaganda, we've already heard some of it here tonight, of those who promote this ideology. Propaganda that's only ramped up in response to the slaughter at Covenant. So as the families mourned and buried their dead, leftists at the highest levels of society, in the national media, the government, the White House, spent the days following the attack doubling down on the rhetoric that caused it. They painted the shooter herself as the victim. There was a trans activist group that put out a statement saying that the shooter is one of the victims of this crime that she committed. They ignored the real victims almost entirely. Some high-profile Democrats even mocked the dead children. The press secretary for the governor of Arizona sent out a tweet hours after the attack with a picture of a woman holding a gun and a caption warning that this is what they do to transphobes. This was the press secretary for the governor of Arizona, and that was her response to an attack where children were killed. There were no statements, none, not from any corporate media outlet, not from any Democrat politician anywhere, denouncing hate and violence against Christians. They didn't even pretend to care. Instead, they denounced hate against trans people. They said that trans people are the ones being exterminated. They claim that there's an anti-trans genocide being carried out. And when you tell people who are really disturbed that they are the target of a genocide, you are all but directly inviting them to do exactly what they did at Covenant. It is a direct invitation. Now, it certainly was not the first time that they warned about this alleged genocidal conspiracy against trans people. They've been yelling about the trans genocide for a long time. They've repeatedly accused me of personally encouraging and somehow participating in this genocide. Anybody who opposes the trans agenda is automatically genocidal, according to the gender ideologues. So by failing to affirm transgenderism, by standing in its way, by disagreeing with it, we are engaging in a form of mass murder. By simply saying to a trans person, I disagree with what you're saying, you are killing them, is what we're told. We are Nazis committing a Holocaust against the trans community just by disagreeing. Now, what do they mean by this? I think it's important to try to dissect what they mean. When they talk about a genocide, you're getting people killed, all the rest of it. Well, of course, first and foremost, it's just a reckless and intentional lie meant to incite, which it succeeds in doing. But what else is going on here? Well, we know that the genocide claims cannot refer to any kind of external physical threat, because trans people face no such threat. Now, sure, towards the end of each year, you'll see reports in the media about all the trans people who were murdered during that span. They'll say at the end of the year, this is how many trans people were murdered this year. And they'll give these reports, and they'll put the reports out, and this will be accompanied by denunciations of hate and transphobia. They'll say that transphobia led to all this murder. What they don't tell you is that nearly all of those murders were just murders. They were homicides related to domestic disputes, prostitution, drug use. The propagandists, what they'll do is they'll tally up every single trans person who was the victim of any homicide at all in a given year, and they'll imply, or directly state sometimes, that every single one of them was a hate crime, as if it's impossible for a trans person to be killed for any other reason. Now, this is nonsense, obviously. The question really is how many trans people are murdered in a single year for being trans? Well, for the most recent year on record, which is 2021, the FBI has a number. They'll tell you what the number is. Okay, this is the genocide, the number of trans people being killed for being trans, according to the FBI. Are you ready for that number? Here it is. 2 in the entire year. 2 trans people in the entire country, in an entire year, killed in what the FBI would call a hate crime. This is the epidemic that you hear about. This is the genocide. 2 people. The Trans Terrorist Covenant killed 3 times that many in one attack. Now, to put this in perspective, a recent USA Today report claims that 1.6% of the US adult population identifies as trans or non-binary, which works out to around 4.1 million people. This is the adult population anyway. That means 0.00004% of that population was murdered in a hate crime. Overall, the FBI recorded 271 hate crimes against trans people. This includes, harassment, intimidation, assault. These are not mostly murders. 271. So taking all hate crimes into account, 0.006% of the trans and non-binary population were victims. 0.006%. There were also 1,341 racially motivated hate crimes against white people that the FBI tabulates, which works out to 0.0006% of the white population, which means that if you're a white trans person, you are nearly as likely to be victimized for being white as you are for being trans. It's a difference of a tiny fraction of 1%. And that is in spite of the fact that the people who charge these crimes and compile these statistics have a vested interest in vastly undercounting the number of anti-white hate crimes while vastly overcounting the anti-trans hate crimes. Despite that, still the numbers for trans people victimized in a given year is vanishingly minuscule. It practically doesn't happen at all, percentage-wise. So there is no significant outward physical threat against trans people, period. It doesn't exist. So then what do they mean by genocide? Well, to answer that question, we have to consider the fact that we live in the age of what some philosophers have dubbed the psychological man. And what this means is that in our era, we define ourselves by our psychological state. Now, the individual sees his selfhood as an amalgamation of his beliefs, his perceptions, his feelings, his desires. In other words, myself is how I feel about myself. My feelings about myself are myself. Now, nobody on the left has ever been able to define the word woman or explain what a man means when he says, I identify as a woman, but this is the answer. This is the one that none of them can actually give because they don't understand their own worldview enough to give it. But their real answer is, a man is a woman if he feels like one, because we are our feelings. That's what the self is, according to the left. My inner self-perception determines myself. I don't need to bring my self-perception into alignment with my physical self. It goes the other way around. I bring my physical self into alignment with my self-perception. This is how the leftist mind works. Indeed, this is how the modern mind works. Even those of us who reject transgenderism still share some of the underlying psychological scaffolding that the ideology rests upon. We all tend to place a premium on our feelings. Many of us fundamentally and mistakenly believe that the very point of life, the only point really, is to conjure good feelings about ourselves and to cling on to those feelings no matter what it takes. This is a very modern, very Western attitude. You go anywhere else in time or anywhere else on the globe, and it will be foreign to them. And that needed to be established first before transgenderism could gain a foothold. So, what does all this mean for the genocide claims? Well, it means that my self-perception is myself. My feelings about myself are what determine and define my selfhood. So then, when you fail to affirm my feelings, when you call those feelings into question, Even worse, when you cause me to question my feelings about myself, you are in effect killing me. By making me feel bad, you are assaulting my emotions, my inner peace, my inner perception. And that is worse than assaulting me physically because my feelings are more important than my body. This is what the left thinks. Misgendering trans people, therefore, becomes a genocidal act, no different from rounding them up and throwing them into a concentration camp. It's the same kind of thing. Because you may not be injuring their bodies, but you are injuring their self-perception. You are hurting their feelings. It is a holocaust of hurt feelings. And among the trans and LGBT activists, that is just as bad as an actual Holocaust, and they will tell you that directly. Now, that's not to say that trans people face no significant physical threats. They do. It's just that the threats come from themselves. Now, as they say in horror movies, the call is coming from inside the house. The statistics clearly show, and this is the part that people don't want to hear. People don't want to hear everything I've said so far, and everything I'm going to say. But what the statistics show us is that if a trans person is going to be killed by anyone, the culprit will almost certainly be himself. Okay, the individual trans person is the greatest threat to himself. Okay, if you could shut the hell up for a second, let me finish my thought. Okay, there will be a time in the Q&A for you for your little outbursts. But thank you for intelligent rebuttal, sir. Now, the majority of trans people who are killed each year are killed by suicide. And this is the other meaning. This is the second connotation behind the genocide claim. If you disagree with them, if you fail to affirm them, they might kill themselves in response, right? Trans activists, what they do is they hold a gun to their own heads and they tell you to back down or they will pull the trigger. It is the most grotesque form of emotional blackmail imaginable, using suicide as a bargaining chip. And this is what they do. This is the genocide. When they use the term genocide, what they really mean is, if you hurt my feelings, I will kill myself, and it will be your fault. And this has proven to be a very effective tactic. But it shouldn't be. Because the appropriate response to these kinds of perverse ransom demands is this: no, your feelings are not my responsibility. It is not my job to prop up your self-perception. You don't get to put that burden on me. It is not my job. And though I very much hope that you don't hurt yourself, if you do, it will not be my fault. You are not going to hold that over my head. You will not threaten me like that. You will not manipulate me into silence. Your actions are your own choice. I cannot control them. You are not my puppet dancing on a string. You are your own person. But if you're looking for something external to blame, well, you do have one thing. It's not me, and it's not any critic of your ideology. It is the ideology itself. You can blame trans ideology itself. So if we're expanding the concept of genocide, then we must conclude that transgenderism is genocidal. Transgenderism itself is genocidal. It is a genocidal conspiracy, if we have decided to expand this term the way the left has. The ideology itself is genocidal. And not just because it drives radicals like the Covenant shooter to commit mass murder against Christians. The ideology is genocidal because of what it does to those who are brainwashed into it. It is genocidal against the very people who are screaming about genocides. Now, it's true that the rate of attempted suicide among trans people is extraordinarily high. Trans activists will often claim that it's as high as 40%. Now, the evidence for that figure is rather spotty, just like the evidence for everything else they say is rather spotty at best. But there does seem to be enough evidence to conclude that the rate, whatever it is exactly, is significantly higher than the general population. And everyone agrees on that. It's a lot higher, whatever it is. Meanwhile, the rate of suicidal ideation among trans people, the number of trans people who consider killing themselves in a given year, the last study I read was over 50%. I've seen some that go over 60% or more. So there seems to be wide agreement that trans-identified people are much, much more likely to consider suicide and to attempt it than non-trans people. Now, the activists have their own explanation for this, of course. They claim that trans people, well, they attempt suicide at such a staggering rate because they're bullied and they're rejected by society, right? But this explanation doesn't hold water for even a second. Because if the suicide rate was linked to societal rejection, then we should find that it drops precipitously and becomes much closer to a level commensurate with the general population as society becomes more and more affirming of trans people. Yet that is not what we find. Suicidality among trans-identified people remains sky high, even as society, by any objective measure, becomes far more accepting of trans-identified people than it ever has been. In fact, the problem for this line of thinking runs even deeper. Because think about this, prior to the mid-20th century, there was no acceptance of transgenderism at all, okay? Before all this was invented by quack sexologists and psychotherapists in the mid-20th century, there was no acceptance of it, none. For most of human history, a man who claimed to actually be a woman would have been laughed at, ridiculed, rejected, ostracized completely by everybody in society and by every institution. So if, as the left claims, if the increase in trans identification is not the result of social contagion, they say that it's not. We see the trans identification is rising every year. They say that's not social contagion, that's just reflective of the number of trans people who've always existed, but they were afraid to come out of the closet until now. So if that's the case, and if also the lack of affirmation causes suicide, well, that should mean that thousands and thousands of trans people were killing themselves worldwide every year, everywhere, for thousands of years. We should have some kind of evidence of a mysterious global suicide epidemic which lasted millennia. You know how much evidence there is for that? None. Zero evidence of any such thing ever happening. In fact, as far as we know, the suicide rate in modern America is the highest now that it's ever been. Even while it's the most affirming that it's ever been. Isn't that interesting? Now, we do, on the other hand, have examples of actually persecuted and oppressed groups, groups that faced enslavement, groups that faced literal physical genocide. None of them had a suicidality rate of 50%, or even close to it. Even the victims of Nazi concentration camps, while they were in the camps, had a suicide rate, according to one study, of 25%, which is still very high, obviously, compared to the general population. But they were killing themselves as a means of escaping starvation and torture and the knowledge that they were going to die anyway in gas chambers. And even then, it was only half of what it is for trans people today. Now, let me ask you this. And actually, the clowns in here who have been shouting out, you can shout out an answer to this one. Is the life of a trans person in modern America more difficult than a Jew in the Holocaust or a black slave in the 1840s? No, probably not, yeah.
What do you know about either?
No. I said answer the question. I didn't say raise other. Now, would anyone like to step up to the plate, maybe we could do in the Q&A, and defend the proposition that trans people today have it worse? Really, because their suicide rate is the highest, and this is all caused by bullying, that should mean that they have it worse than anyone in history ever has, in order for that logic to work. But it simply doesn't at all. Now, actually, far from a difficult life, trans people in modern America are among the most privileged human beings to have ever walked the face of this earth. They are relentlessly celebrated by our major institutions. They are affirmed, applauded, worshipped practically every major corporation, every government agency. The National Weather Service on Friday put out a statement praising trans people. Even the Weather Service has to do it now. Hollywood, academia, the media, all dedicated to affirming these people. Laws are rewritten to accommodate their mistaken self-perceptions. Society is restructured around their mental illness. The dictionary is edited to include them. They are followed around by a cheering parade and a marching band with trans flags waving proudly in the wind, and yet they are still in a state of self-destructive, suicidal despair. Perhaps we should consider another possibility. Maybe it's time to wonder whether there might be something deeper going on. If you desperately need this much affirmation all the time, and it still isn't enough. If you are sent into convulsions of panicked rage because even one person amid a fawning crowd fails to applaud you enthusiastically enough, it might be because there's something seriously wrong within you. And I know what the thing is. Trans ideology is self-destructive at its core. It is in effect a suicide cult. It breeds despair and hopelessness. It puts a person into conflict with his own inherent biological nature. To be trans, to fall victim to the trans ideology, to get sucked into the cult, is to be at war with yourself. It is to be perpetually in a state of violent self-rejection. Now, as we discovered while making my film, What is a Woman?, trans-identified people cannot speak coherently about themselves or their identities. They like to speak about their identities. Oftentimes it's the only thing they want to talk about, but they can't say anything cogent or intelligible about it. They can't explain it. They could just assert it. Well, that's because trans ideology is confusion. That's what it is. It causes you to call into question your true biological identity, but it doesn't replace that identity with anything solid or intelligible. It creates confusion where there was once clarity, darkness where there was once light, and in the darkness, from the darkness, comes anxiety, which is the fear of the unknown. And the unknown in this case is the self. Okay, trans ideology makes a person's self incoherent and mysterious to himself. Trans ideology, in other words, it's an anxiety machine, basically. It's a depression factory. It is an ideology perfectly crafted to make people kill themselves. The trans genocide, what we may call a self-genocide, goes beyond this. The ideology drives its adherents to self-destruction. You know, they drink the trans Kool-Aid like the disciples of the People's Temple, lining up to dose themselves with cyanide. And not every cult member is there by choice. We have to acknowledge that. There were children among the 900 who died in Jonestown, just as there are many children who fall victim to the trans cult today. Children are castrated and sterilized. Entire future generations erased in the name of gender affirmation. If there's a genocide going on, that's part of it. People who are too young to consent, too young to understand what they're doing and what is being done to them, are nonetheless ushered into a sterile life of suicidal depression, where they'll be unable to have children of their own in the future, unable to grow fully into the sex they were born as, stuck eternally in this limbo state, not fully resembling either their true sex or the one they're trying to transition into. So if you're looking for genocide, here it is. But the left tells us that genocide can come in more abstract forms. For them, that means a genocide of feelings. But I would borrow this concept again, and I would point to a different form of non-literal genocide inflicted upon the country by trans ideology. That is a genocide of common sense, a genocide of truth. This is the greatest threat posed by transgenderism, not the physical harm it causes, which is immense, but the even greater crisis is that it destroys our recognition of and our ability to understand basic truth. Now, it's for this reason, first and foremost, it's assault on truth, that I say trans ideology is the most toxic evil our nation faces today. And it must be burned to the ground, destroyed completely. Now, If you are a trans-identified person, and you hear that, you should be the most on board with this campaign. Because trans ideology has taken more from you than it's taken from me or any of the rest of us. You are a victim. You are. Just not in the way that you think. You are a victim of transgenderism. You have fallen prey to this ideology. And the ideology is wrong, which means that you are wrong. You are wrong about your view of the world and of reality and of yourself. You are deeply, catastrophically wrong, and you are on a path that can only lead to despair, I promise you. It cannot have any other outcome. Most people will not tell you this. Okay, they will lie to you because they don't care about you. Your life means nothing to them. The people who are pushing this on you and telling you it's so great and applauding it, they don't give a shit about you. That's what you need to understand. Your life means nothing to them. And your crippling regret that you will feel in the future, when you feel it, it will not faze them. You will come back to them and you will say, how could you have gone along with this? Why didn't you tell me the truth? How did you let me do this to myself? They won't care enough to even answer you. They will leave you to wallow in the shattered remnants of your life and your broken and mutilated body. And they will feel nothing because they are using you. They are deceiving you. I am not. They don't care about you. I do. Now, you can scream at me all you want, as some in this room already have. Call me every name in the book. You can wish death on me and my family. You can threaten to kill me and my family. You can show up at my house. You can dox me. You can come after my wife and children. And you have already done all of that many times. But it won't change the truth of what I'm saying to you. And it won't stop me from saying it. If you are a trans woman, you are not a woman. If you are a trans man, you are not a man. If you are non-binary, you're not that either, because that's not even a thing. That doesn't make sense. You will never be the version of yourself that you are trying to be. You never will. That version is a figment of your imagination. It is a mirage in the desert. It is not real. You are an entire universe away from actually being what you claim to be. And no matter how much you pursue that phantom, you will always remain as far from it as you are right now and as you were when you started. And here's the thing. You know that. You know that, don't you? Deep down within yourself, you know it's all a lie. You call yourself a trans woman, but you look at the real women in this room tonight, and you know that you will never be what they are. You know that. You know they have something you will never have. You will only ever be a pale imitation at best, and not a good one. You will only ever be like a really bad cover band butchering a classic and stripping it of everything that made it beautiful. This is all you will ever be if you continue down this road. You recognize this, and you know it. I know you know it because that's why you obsessively demand that everyone affirm you and convince you of the validity of your own identity. You know, I've never desired to be affirmed in my manhood by anyone. If someone told me that I'm not a man, okay, it would not faze me in the slightest because I know that I am one. You can't make me question that because it's just true. I don't need anyone to affirm it. Now, you do need to be affirmed because your self-identity is a fragile stack of empty boxes perched up on a ledge, just waiting to be blown over by a slight breeze. It's all fake. It's all a lie. It's a lie you tell yourself, but you will never truly believe. And I know there's a voice inside your head that whispers that to you at night. I know there is. the voice you try to drown out, the voice you hate even more than you hate me. Listen to that voice. Stop running from it. Stop running from yourself. It's a race you cannot win. And why would you want to? There's nothing wrong with who you are, who you physically, innately, actually, biologically are. Be that person. Accept yourself as yourself. You have no choice anyway. You're only given this one body, this one identity. You'll never have another in this life. You can go to as many surgeons as you want. They cannot give you a new body. They can only mutilate the one you already have. And you know, the fact that you'll never have another identity or another body, that's okay. Until recently, I'd always thought that the slogan, be yourself, was just a vapid kind of a new age platitude. Maybe it was intended to be originally. But these days it's taken on real meaning and real urgency. Yeah, be yourself, your actual self. It's the only self you'll ever have. And there's nothing wrong with it. Stop hiding from who you are. Embrace yourself. Embrace the truth. Come live in reality and be free. Thank you, everybody.
And now the Q&A session will begin.
Thank you.
And now the Q&A session will begin. If you have a brief question for Matt, come to the room or come to the back of the room and stand behind my colleague.
Good evening, Mr. Walsh.
Oh, right in front of me. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here. Wonderful talk. I just wanted to say my name is Florencia, and we appreciate the initiative you've taken in states such as Tennessee to start working on legislation to stop the abuse and indoctrination of kids by the gender ideology movement. And I just wanted to ask, do you think that's attainable in states such as New Mexico? And if so, how do you recommend we start that revolution here in states such as this one?
Yeah, I think it is attainable. The way I'd like to see it done is on the federal level, because this should also be, this is a federal issue, and the federal government needs to act to protect kids from this mutilation and abuse that's happening nationwide, especially now that you have states passing laws to try to override and supersede the states that have banned this stuff by inviting parents, abusive parents, to bring their kids to their states to be mutilated. So that's the reason for the federal government to step in. That's obviously not going to happen with our current federal government, but that should be an issue for 2024. Whoever the Republican candidate is, they need to be on board vocally and explicitly with a ban on this on the federal level. Until that happens, no, I don't think it's. I think it's an uphill battle in a state like New Mexico and many other states as well. It's not impossible. I think here's the one hurdle you have to get over. Most people, when they find out what gender affirming care actually is, they are viscerally repulsed by it. In fact, every sane, decent person is. It would just be impossible to be a sane, decent person and say that, oh yeah, it's definitely okay to chemically castrate a child. So I think that's probably true even in New Mexico, but you have to get the word out. You have to raise awareness. So it begins with raising awareness, and that involves getting out on the street, doing actual rallies. We did that in Nashville. The left is very good at this. They're very good at being physically present, and it really does work. Hashtag campaigns and all the rest of it are fine, but you have to be physically out there. And then look for examples. One thing we did in Tennessee to get this ban passed is we said, well, let's just go to our local hospital here, Vanderbilt, and find out what they're doing. Get all the information we can and lay it out for people. And that's what we did. So I would say find the examples in New Mexico of this sort of thing. Who's doing it? What are they doing? And start spreading the word about that.
Thank you so much. God bless you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm not really here to disagree, but more so to ask a question within your own ideologies. What do you think about, well, first I want to say, do you identify as a Christian or someone who follows Judeo-Christian beliefs?
Yes.
So what do you think about Jesus when he sent Philip to Ethiopia and Philip spread the gospel to an Ethiopian eunuch who then helped evangelize Christ throughout Africa and led to the modern day church today, which currently still evangelizes those Judeo-Christian beliefs? What do you have to say about the gospel being given to a sexual gender minority of that time, more so a eunuch? Thank you.
Well, first of all, I would strongly disagree with the idea that a eunuch is comparable to what you would call a sexual or gender minority in modern America. So I think that that's an anachronism that you're forcing back onto the text. You know, a eunuch in those days, and even now, if we're referring to eunuchs today, we're not talking about a separate quote unquote gender. We're not talking about someone who's a man and says, I'm actually a woman now because I've castrated myself. So it's not applicable. One has nothing to do with the other. That's it. It has nothing to do with anything. Sorry, before you go, one other quick note I'll make about that, because I just said that eunuch wouldn't be considered even a gender identity today. I have to correct myself because now I realize that in the most recent WPATH, which is the World Professional Organization of Transgender Health, the big trans medical organization in the world, they had their recent conference, and they actually had a guy up at the conference saying that eunuchs, men who are castrated, should now be recognized as their own gender identity. So they are doing that now. I think I gave us a little bit more credit than I should have. Yeah.
Hi, Matt. I'm transgender. I'm born and raised here in New Mexico. I have a graduate degree in information technology, marketing, business, and finance. I own my own home. I pay taxes. I have a 6-figure job. I'm a respected professional in Albuquerque. I'm a mother. My life experience is that I'm an awesome person. I am well-liked. I'm responsible. And I think I'm pretty cool. You touched on something. You said something earlier that for you, when somebody calls you a man, it doesn't faze you because, you just know that you're a man. That was interesting to me because I feel the same way about my identity as a woman. My question leading up to this, you've asserted that no one would ever see me as a woman, that nobody would ever see or could see a transgender person as a woman, and yet I have dozens of friends from diverse backgrounds, women from the reservation, a woman from Japan, several immigrant women. I have my coworkers, I have my boss, my VP, my CEO, all respecting me as a woman, my family, my long-term friends who are actually here with me. All of these people assure me, I'm a woman. They'll tell me, girl, there is no way you are a man. They see me as a woman. So the question,
Okay.
how can you assert that nobody would ever see me as a woman when my material experience tells me you're wrong?
Okay. It's interesting that that's the part of my talk you chose to ask a question about, because that's not in my talk at all. I don't believe I said that no one would ever see you as a woman. I mean, it's possible, I suppose, that you could fool someone. Now, you brought this up, so I have to tell you that you brought this up. You've put your identity on the table for conversation. And so I'm going to say you wouldn't fool me at all. I mean, I see a man 100%. And I think that most people would. Now, the fact that you have people in your life who are saying to you, oh, you're totally a woman, it's exactly what I'm talking about. No one in my life has ever once said to me, you're totally a man, Matt. You know, if a friend of mine called me on the phone and said, listen, Matt, I want you to know you're really a man, I would think that there was something wrong with him. I would say, why are you saying that at all? It doesn't make any sense. So the fact that this is a conversation to begin with tells me, it only proves the point that I'm trying to make, that your identity, even in your own mind, is up for, it's something that you need to be assured of. Now, what I would like to ask you, again, because you're standing here, and so you've brought your identity on the table for discussion. So how do you know that you're a woman?
It was first when I heard transgender persons describe their experience in their own words, and this was only about 2 years ago. Hearing somebody describe things, it was a woman from like England, describing her experience, her childhood, her teenage years. And it blew my mind to be listening to her, because it was just some podcast that I was listening to while I was like doing laundry. But it blew my mind to hear somebody so eloquently and precisely describe things that I had experiences
What
that
was
I
the
had
description?
experienced.
What did they say?
Okay, so I am honestly hesitant. I know that you touched earlier about the difficulty that transgender women might have in describing their identity, but I want to state, I honestly don't feel that you would engage in this conversation in good faith.
Then why are
And
you here?
so-
Why did you stand up to talk to me if you don't want to have a conversation? You're saying that you discovered that you're a woman. I'm asking you how you did. That's a very fair question.
Okay.
How do you know that you're a woman?
That's fine. All right. So first of all, listening to transgender people, and it was like, okay, this is a one-off, one person describing these things. Things like looking at yourself in the mirror and not recognizing yourself. Hearing compliments like, you are such an example, like a positive masculine role model. And just hearing that and being like, it feels like they're talking about somebody else. It means feeling alone, even when you're surrounded by guys, even when you have a lot of friends. And I was active in like Boy Scouts. I'm an Eagle Scout. I had great masculine role models my whole life. And yet I never felt like I belonged. I felt welcome and
But
included.
why does that make you a woman?
Because
As opposed to just a man who doesn't get along with some other men, or a man who's depressed, or a man who doesn't feel at home totally in his body, which, by the way, is a pretty universal human experience. Everybody goes through it at one time or another. So in what way does that make you a woman, though? And it's interesting. You're telling me that you listen to the experiences of other transgender people.
Well, yeah.
But what about women?
So
Because trans women are women, you would say, right?
I would say that. Yes.
Exactly the same?
Yes.
Okay, well then why do you
Well-
need to hear the testimony of quote unquote trans women? Like how you pick any actual woman in this room? In what way do you know that you belong in the same category as them?
I know because they tell me. So here was the
You need them to tell you what you are?
women. Yes. I trust the opinions of the women around me.
And if most
it's
women-
incredible. You might try it sometime.
If most women voted and said they don't see you as a woman, would you say I'm not a woman anymore?
If who?
If most women voted and said they don't see you as a woman anymore, would you then relent and say I'm not a woman?
I would say most people on the planet have no idea who I am. I'm going to trust the opinions of the people who've spent their lives with me.
But you are relying on other people to tell you who you are, is what we're establishing.
For context, I know you like to think, I know you like to say, everybody's rah-rahing and supporting transgender people, and yet they're still killing themselves, etc. But I'm standing here in a room full of people applauding you and asking questions like, how can I put out legislation here in New Mexico, my home state I grew up in, to try to reverse transgenderism? I'm not safe. And it
How are you
wasn't,
not safe? You just said you're standing in a room with people who disagree with you and you're perfectly fine. So how are you not safe? Okay, look, we're going round and round. You don't want to answer any of the questions. Maybe we'll end with this because we're talking about womanhood. So people could probably shout out the question I'm going to ask you right now.
Okay.
But you know that you're a woman.
Yes.
What is that?
So gender is a social thing. It only
I don't want
makes
to hear
sense
that.
in
What is a
social-
woman? What
No.
is a woman?
What is a woman?
The word woman, define in the dictionary. Go.
A woman is somebody who is included and respected and seen and participates in society, recognized by other women. If you speak with women,
Circular definition.
that's my whatever.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Thank you. Good. I tried.
Hi.
So, you've talked a lot about the mental illness and depressed and anxious population in the trans community, but you don't talk about the happy people in the trans community and how these preventative measures of, let's say, like puberty and the surgeries that go for gender affirmation and how these are life-changing and life-saving. I know
So,
many people.
How do you know?
Oh, okay. 1 second, if I can finish my conversation.
Okay.
Many people in my life have had these interventions made, and it's saved their lives. I can list dozens of people in my life. So, what do you have to say for?
You can list dozens of people who had surgeries and drugs as children and would be dead today if they hadn't?
I'm sorry. Let me rephrase that. Dozens of people who have had interventions, including gender affirming, let's say therapies, yes, hormones, surgeries that have made their lives better. I'm not saying it didn't force them to commit suicide, but it made their lives better. What do you have to say for the happy trans community?
I guess I would throw it back at you first, because the burden of proof is on you on this one. And I'll explain why the burden of proof is on you. Because, as I went over in the talk, for thousands of years, human beings existed, and there was no such thing as trying to medically transition people into another gender. And as far as we know, there was no suicide epidemic because of it. And then in the last few years, people like yourself have come along and said, we desperately need to do this, or people will be in despair and they might kill themselves. So you are making a claim that contradicts common sense, science, biology, also the entire experience of the whole history of the human race. And so what that means is that the burden of proof is on you to support it. And so I'm going to ask you, you said that people need this stuff so they can live happier lives and potentially it'd be life-saving, you said even. Aside from your anecdotes of your friends who told you so, how do you know that?
Okay, so thinking back to when I was 16 in an anatomy class, when I learned that transgender people tend to have the brain structure that confirms their identity that they identify with. And you can look that up. That's a fact.
I will look that up.
Yeah, it's a fact.
I will look it up and I won't find it.
Yeah.
It's not a fact. It's not a fact.
Should we all pull out Google really quick and look?
So you're saying a trans man has the brain of a woman?
No. I'm saying that a trans man who identifies as a man will tend to have similar brain structure that a cis man would.
And where did you get that from?
Look it up. It's literally, I'm telling you, I learned it from my anatomy class when I was 16. And I looked up the fact before I walked up here because I knew that you would ask.
Okay. That's not true, but it also doesn't answer the question. So let's try to stay focused on one false claim at a time if we can, because we might get bogged down.
Okay.
So you actually started by saying that blocking puberty, which is chemical castration of a child,
Just one example, yeah.
yeah, is life-saving.
It can be.
How do you know?
Because there are children who have been suicidal that have had these interventions made.
What children? How do you know? And how many children have had that done
Me personally,
and then
I
are
haven't
still
met
suicidal?
children. Me personally, I haven't met enough trans children to answer that question.
Okay.
But I know
You
that
are
the
making-
research exists.
You're making this statement, you're stating it as a fact in front of all these people. There must be a reason, there must be something that you encountered that led you to this rather radical conclusion that to save a child's life, you have to chemically castrate him.
Not every child. No, sir.
Okay, well, that is what you just said. The drugs we give to kids for puberty blockers, so-called puberty blockers, originally are cancer drugs used to treat prostate cancer. They're also used to chemically castrate sex offenders and child rapists. Now we give them to physically healthy kids. You're saying that we need to do that or they will die. And so one last time I'm going to ask you, what evidence do you have of that remarkable claim?
I don't think I claimed that every child would benefit from that.
Well, no, I didn't say you did.
Okay,
You said puberty blockers
you did.
you said puberty blockers are life-saving. What
I
evidence do you
said
have for that?
they can be.
So
The
how do you
evidence
know?
is the encounters with patients who have had these procedures done, and it has saved their, I don't want to say it saved their lives, but it has made their lives better. I can't confirm whether or not they're alive right this second, but there are children that it has helped. So what do you have to say for the happy trans community who has benefited from these procedures? That's my question
I guess what I have
for
to
you.
say is that your entire question is built on a whole stack of false premises that you can't begin to even remotely defend. So it's a faulty question from the start. I reject your premise. I absolutely reject that there are any kids who need to be chemically castrated in order to be happy.
Okay, let's.
I reject that.
Mr. Walsh, hi, my name is Landon Schumer. I am a high school student here in Las Cruces, New Mexico. I just want to say thank you for coming here. The last time I saw this much excitement here in town was when the Raising Cane's opened up by the mall.
Am I second behind that, or am I in front of it?
It's pretty close.
All right,
pretty close.
Okay. I'll take second place.
So I just wanted to ask you, from when you were first starting out, doing this, giving talks, having people come and listen to you, what was the path that you had to take in order to be where you are now, where there's millions of people listening to you, thousands of people, at every one of your conventions? Because I know that was probably a lot different from when you first started. So what was the path that you had to take in order to be heard and understood, up until the point you're at now?
Yeah, we got one softball in here. No, I appreciate it. It's actually, I get asked this question a lot, and I have to come up with a more interesting story, because my story is not interesting at all. I started a blog about 10 years ago, and I called it the Matt Walsh blog. It was a very creative title. And so I started writing, and I did that for about a year, and I was writing to nobody at all, really, and it started to catch on, and I kind of built an audience from there. And then I ended up working at the Daily Wire. I told you it was a boring story, but that's
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
This will be the last question.
Hi, Mr. Walsh. My name is Luna, and I am a nationally registered advanced EMT here in the state of New Mexico. I am also transgender. Throughout my career as an EMT, I have responded to, by conservative estimates, about 1,500 calls for service here in the state of New Mexico. I have treated more transgender people than I can count. Who will tell me that the support of the people in their lives makes a difference in their lives? And that's been my experience as well. My question for you is, despite all of these transgender people who tell me how great things are for them, I have never once treated somebody who told me that they regretted their transition. Never once. It hasn't happened. So where is this supposed epidemic of people regretting their transitions?
Well, you could just ask them. Are you denying that they exist?
I understand they exist. I haven't seen significant evidence of it to nearly the same extent as people who tell me they're happy with their transitions.
Okay, that's fine. You personally haven't seen them. I have. I talk to them all the time, so I know that they're out there. I know they exist. I also know that, I know a couple other things. I also know that the suicide rate, as we established, suicidality for trans people remains sky high even after transition. And I went over in the talk why all of the explanations for that somebody on your side of the discussion might offer don't hold water, they don't work, which tells us that there's something else going on, and which tells us that there's still a deep despair there. So those people who identify as trans, then they transition, and then they kill themselves, which is a large number, they might not articulate, many of them may articulate this, but they might not articulate that they regret this. But even so, as they say, actions speak louder than words. And so it's pretty clear that there's something deeply wrong here. And it's also clear to me that if transition is supposed to make trans people happier, on a large scale, it's not working. And when you've got suicidality, rate of 50% or more, that tells me that this plan for making this group of people who are 50% suicidal isn't working. I mean, if that's not enough to convince you, I don't know what else to tell you. And one other final point that I'll make as well, because we've all these questions, and I appreciate the questions. I appreciate that you guys at least are coming up to talk to me. In most schools, they won't even do that. So I appreciate that. But all of these questions are about, well, this trans person says that they're happy. I say that I'm happy. Even if I were to concede that there may be some trans people who feel like they're happy, I think even then they're lying to themselves, and there's a deeper despair there, which is what led them to reject themselves in the first place. But we could put that entirely to the side, because what I'd like to do is get back to the question of, is it true, okay? It might make a man, maybe there's a man out there who feels happier if we affirm him as a woman. Is it true, though? Is it actually true? And I would say that the truth matters first before we get to the emotional questions. So, I'll throw it back to you. Biological male says that he's a woman, wants to be affirmed as a woman. Is it true? Is the claim that he's making about himself, is it actually true?
Yes.
How? How do you know that?
How would you define a woman? Because you've asked other people up here to define how we would define a woman. How would you define a woman, Mr. Walsh?
An adult human female.
And how don't trans people, how doesn't a transgender woman fit that definition?
Because they're not female. They have, you said that you are a biological male, correct?
I said I'm transgender. I might be intersex for all we know. About almost as many people in the world are transgender as intersex, and
Well,
a lot of people don't know.
Well, but that's a different conversation. Intersex, that's a genetic anomaly, that's a medical condition. So that's a completely different conversation. That's also that's not a third gender. That's a genetic anomaly that occurs within the sex binary of male and female. What you're saying is that a quote-unquote trans woman is a female.
By the definitions I'm familiar with, yes.
So how would you define female?
Through my training in healthcare, there are several different categories for how we define sex. People bring up chromosomes. People also bring up hormone levels. People bring up all sorts of other categories. Lots of people don't fit neatly into a gender binary, even people we don't consider to be intersex. It's a complicated spectrum.
It's not complicated, but you also didn't define. So what is a woman? What is a female? What do these words mean?
It's complicated, and I know you're not going to like that answer, but that's because there are no simple answers in human biology.
Let me ask you a question.
You guys,
Can I ask you one last
hang
question?
on. Just let me finish. You guys like to bring up high school level biology classes a lot. I get that a lot, but people who go on to more complicated biology classes will talk about sex as a spectrum.
It's not. It's not.
Well, biological researchers would disagree with you.
Well, then they're full of shit, the ones that would say that. There are male gametes and female gametes. Oh, I had one last question. I just had one quick, can you come back for 1 second? Because this is an important question. You said you're an EMT.
Yes.
Okay, if you're responding to a health emergency. Biological male, somebody with a penis, is having a medical emergency. And they say to you, I think I'm having a miscarriage. Would you check them to see if they're having a miscarriage? Would you consider that a possibility for them?
Look. No, but that's because some people don't have body parts. Doesn't mean they're not a woman.
Okay. Sounds like we've established there are some people who, in principle, can get pregnant, and there are some people who can't. So there's two categories, otherwise known as binary.
Lots of women can't get pregnant either.
Yeah, but they're still of the nature to get pregnant. The only
But
reason
they can't get pregnant.
Yes, but
truth matters, right?
it does. That's what I'm trying to explain to you.
Truth matters, and they can't
Okay,
get pregnant. That's the truth. So how are they still women?
Because they are for the same reason that I can rightly say that human beings have two legs. And if a person is born with only one leg, that doesn't call into question the statement that human beings have two legs, okay? A person being born with one leg doesn't mean that now legs are on a spectrum and we can't say anything at all about how many legs a person has. Who knows? They could be a centipede. You know, they could have 100 legs. No, we know human beings have two legs. If a human is born without two legs, something went wrong. They were supposed to have that second leg. Something went wrong. If you meet a person on the street who only has one leg, maybe they had an accident. Maybe they were in war. Maybe something, maybe they were in a car accident. Maybe they had cancer. A leg was cut off. But you know that something went wrong because by their nature, they're supposed to have two legs. Same thing for a woman. A woman by her nature can get pregnant. A man by his nature never can. So if you meet a woman of childbearing age, say she's 28 years old, and she can't get pregnant, you know automatically that something has gone wrong. And she can go to the doctor and find out what that thing is, even if they can't fix it. So that proves that women by their nature can get pregnant because the simple fact that she can't shows you that there is something wrong. This is what is known as the exception that proves the rule. Whereas if a male with a penis can't get pregnant, no doctor on earth is going to run tests to see what's wrong with him. Because they already know it's that he's a male, and there's only male and female, those who can get pregnant and those who can't. So, that's it. I'm working up a sweat over here. So is that it? Are we still going? Let's do, we'll do two more.
Okay.
I do have to get back to the hotel before the bar closes, so I'm just being totally honest with you about my
All right, pleasure
thought
to
process.
meet you. I watch you almost every day. Thank you for speaking for young conservative people. My question isn't really related to what we were talking about tonight, but during the pandemic, I worked at Disney World and another big corporate company, and we were shoved a lot of DEI incentives. And my question for you is, as a young adult in the workforce, in the corporate ladder, how do you deal with these DEI incentives, and how do you work? Like, it's such a distraction.
Yeah, it is, and this is one area where I'm ill-equipped to tell you exactly what to do because where I work, this would never happen. At the Daily Wire, we're not going to have any DEI sessions. The only thing that I'll say to you, just in general, because I get these questions a lot about, what about if I forced to take a DEI seminar or the pronouns thing and all that. I think that we're not required in life to just jump on every grenade we come across and create problems for ourselves where they don't need to be. You also need to make a living for yourself. People have families to support. You got to support your family. And so this is where we have to exercise prudence and discernment. And so you're probably not going to run into your DEI seminar at work and start screaming at them that it's a bunch of bogus nonsense. As satisfying as that would be, I'd love for someone to do that, but you're going to lose your job. And so that's not going to be the right, and then they're just going to replace you with somebody else and they're going to continue on with the seminars. So I think what you have to do at work and also in school is navigate and play the game as much as you can without compromising your integrity or going along with a lie. So there has to be, there has to be a line that we draw that we will not cross. And so I think the line is we never cooperate with a lie. And if that means that you have to tolerate stupid coworkers who put their pronouns in their email signature, whatever, if they try to back you into a corner and force you to say one of their pronouns that aren't correct, well, then that's one of those moments where it's like, well, if I lose my job, I do. But that's where I would draw the line.
Thank you so much, sweet baby gang.
There we go.
What's up, Matt Walsh? My name is Nick Howie. I identify as a Sweet Baby Gang member.
That is the third gender.
Yes, it is, and it's a true one. My question for you is, I have a 9-year-old son in public school here in Las Cruces. He's constantly bombarded with the perverse ideological crap that our nation is facing every day. My wife and I have made the decision to eventually pull him from school after this semester, not only because of the indoctrination, but because the fact that the Las Cruces public school system is nearly, if not dead last in education, and that has nothing to do with the damn funding that they get too. It's both infuriating and demoralizing to try to continue to invoke change within our city and state when our words fall on deaf ears. What advice do you have for those of us who have had to retreat our children into our own spiritual fortress in terms of how to continue to fight against this?
You said that you were going to pull your child out of the school system?
We want to pull him out like right away, but we got a lot of other stuff going on. So
yeah, I think if right this moment you can't pull them out. I realize that there are some parents where you're in a spot and you can't maybe you can't. There's no good private schools around, or you can't afford them. You can't homeschool because both parents have to work. Maybe it's a single parent situation, and so in those sorts of circumstances, as a last resort, you continue sending your kid to public school. But that's the first thing. It's like this is a last resort, only if you have to, and then if you're going to do that, then you need to be, as I'm sure you probably are, as an attentive father, talking to your child every single day about what they're being told at school. Know who all their teachers are. Talk to the teachers. Show up to the PTA meetings. Show up to the school board. Be a pain in their ass. They deserve no privacy at all, the teachers, when it comes to teaching your kids. If there's anything going on in the school that they don't want you to be involved in, or don't want you to know about, or don't want to get your input on, then that already tells you everything you need to know. But that's a Band-Aid solution. That's just plugging the dam. I think the reality is that ultimately, the only real answer for our kids is to get them out of this system, because the government school system is designed to create the kinds of kids that the state, that the regime wants. I mean, that's literally why the public school system was invented. It was never just about ABCs and 1, 2, 3s. It's about moral formation. It's about making citizens. And we know now with the institutions that run our country, we know what sorts of citizens they want to create. And I think it's too much to ask of our kids. This is why I don't have my own kids in public school, because I know my oldest kids are 9 years old also. And I know that, for me to expect them to go into this hostile environment for 6 hours a day, 5 days a week, 9 months a year, for 12 or 13 years, and to survive it and have their souls and their morals intact at the end of it, it's asking a lot. It's asking, in fact, too much. It's asking my kids to do something that even I don't have to do. So I think that ultimately that's the solution, to find a way to get them out. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Enjoy your stay.
All right. Thanks, everybody.